You are listening to the Batflip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Batflip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with my co-host, Matt, coming to you on July 27th of 2021. Man, this is going to be a crazy episode. We got the trade deadline already kicking off. I think we're going to talk about 6 or 7 trades that have already happened. And then we're looking forward to a bunch of other rumors already starting. But before we get into all that, how you doing, Matt?
Doing pretty good. Just hanging out. Sorry we missed the episode last week. We were both busy last week, and we were saving up all our energy for this big trade deadline week. It's going to be a big week and a lot of excitement around Major League Baseball trade deadline, and where some star players might go. I think we might have a real active deadline this year. So.
Yeah, it's already starting. We've had to trade in 4 straight days or something like
I
that,
believe
or
so, and definitely also guys that are all star. At least I think we've had 2 all stars from this year move so far
yeah,
already. So, and I think a couple more guys who have been moved are former all stars. So.
absolutely. Well, we did have one talking point that we wanted to jump to just before we get into all the trades, and that's with the Olympics starting this week. Baseball is back in the Olympics now, and the potential about going forward, MLB building in an extended break, maybe around the All-Star break or something so that we can have the MLB players go over and represent their home countries and play in the Olympic Games.
Yeah, so I just wanted to bring it up here at the start of the show. I've been watching some of the Olympic events and stuff, and there's some sports outside of the U.S. that are played real heavily that here aren't really a big thing. One of them that comes to mind is like team handball. It's not really played in the U.S., but it's like a big thing over in Europe, and a worldwide stage like the Olympics brings stuff like that out, where that'll be on TV. We'll see it, and I feel like that would be a cool thing for baseball to really be mainstream in the Olympics. It's back in the event this year for the first time since 2008, but it's not being showcased very well because most of the players are obviously playing in the big leagues right now. So the big leagues, they decided to not take a break for the Olympics, and so all the players aren't allowed to play in it. So you've got a combination of some AAA or minor league players. A few of them are prospects. I know one that comes to mind is Shane Baz from the Tampa Bay
Mhm.
Rays, prospect that was in that Tyler Glasnow trade a couple years ago. And then you got a few veteran players that are free agents. You've got Matt Kemp was talked about going to play there, but I don't think he ended up
No,
being on the roster. Todd Frazier is one that's on the roster though. So there's a couple guys who are former big leaguers. Scott Kazmier's on the roster.
Edwin
A couple
Jackson.
Edwin Jackson's on the roster. So a few guys who are former big leaguers, um, who are either free agents, and a few of them being in AAA. I know Anthony Gose is another former big leaguer that's on the roster. He's in AAA. So it's really unfortunate to me that we're not able to showcase the best in the world. And I think it would be really great if we had a World Baseball Classic type event, because that event, when it happens, is really, really entertaining. There's a lot of really good competition. You've got, the U.S. is always good. The Dominican's always good. You've got the Puerto Rico. I don't know if Puerto Rico's got their own Olympic team, because obviously being a U.S. territory, but they're always good in the World Baseball Classic. Venezuela would be good.
Mhm.
You look at Japan, put Shohei Ohtani in there,
Yeah,
representing his home country. That would be so cool if he was representing his home country. And obviously, there's no fans in the Olympics over in Japan because they're still dealing with, a lot of the restrictions from the pandemic. But I think that would be some really cool stuff to see some of the star players of the be able to be showcased on a worldwide stage, and for it would help, in my opinion, with some baseball becoming bigger in Europe or something, because I think that would be a big deal for baseball to get bigger in Europe. It's already a worldwide sport. It's big in parts of Central and South America. It's big, obviously, in North America, the Caribbean. It's big over in Asia, at least in Japan, Korea, Taiwan. It's all big all over there, but it's still not real big in Europe. And I think for it to become a worldwide mainstream sport, you want to reach out to that group, and it not being in the Olympic and it being back in the Olympics is going to help that. But I think Major League Baseball while they don't want to take a break in the middle of the season because of revenue purposes, they already take a break with the All Star break. So why not extend the All Star break an extra week to include the Olympics in it? I mean, I think that would be something that um, would be very beneficial to the sport long term and really to help make baseball, which it could potentially be the second most popular sport in the world behind soccer if you did that. Because I mean, I really think that it would take off in Europe if it was actually showcased to them a little bit more than it is. So I think it would be very wise for them for obviously this year, the pandemic year, it's the first time it's been back in the Olympics. So there's definitely some things that, it might you give them a little bit of a pass this time. But I think in 2024, when the Olympics are back, they'll be in Paris in 2024. I think you want to try to figure something out where you allow the players to go play and compete and showcase their skills to the world. Because I think it'll be a lot cooler to watch, Shohei Otani at his home country throwing 100 miles an hour to and watch Mike Trout, who I guess probably wouldn't be playing, but hit a 500-foot home run than it would be to watch Scott Kazmir, who's 37 years old and in AAA, throw to a minor leaguer from somewhere. And so I think that would be very beneficial to the sport to figure out a way to take a break and allow some of the major league players the ability to play in the Olympics. So
Yeah, and maybe not in 2024 like you were saying, but maybe 2028 when the Olympics are, like Los Angeles and stuff, that they wouldn't even have to travel,
yeah,
really around the world. They can just stay in country, and maybe you work something out around that point. But it's a very good point. I mean, other sports like hockey, they do it. They pretty much build in a thing that, the players can go play with their home countries for the Olympics. So it's definitely something that it could possibly come to, major leagues within, I wouldn't say 2024, but probably 2028. If they were serious about looking into that, and if enough people wanted to do it, you've seen a bunch of the MLB players. They take a lot of pride in the World Baseball Classic, and they try and load up all their teams, and all the big stars try and play for their home countries at that point. I don't know what would be so much different about the Olympics and why they wouldn't want to. I think it's just nobody really has tried because it's in the middle of the baseball season every year. So, or
yeah.
now that it's back, but
Yeah, and it's another thing where like I do get the one thing that I get about it is if you're in the middle of the season, shutting down pitchers for 2 weeks, I get it, but at the same time you're shutting them down for 1 week already with the All Star break, and if the pitchers are smart, they'll go to they'll go they'll go throw during the break. They'll go have a live batting practice at the string training facility or something. Like, I mean, you can keep yourself in game shape for 2 weeks. You see it all the time, and in fact, it might even help because it gives some players a little bit of extra rest. Um, but I did see an article on CBSSports.com. I forgot who wrote it, but they did a little bit of an interview with Bryce Harper, and he was talking about how cool it would be able to represent the U.S. on the Olympic stage, and that it was a shame that Major League Baseball didn't support that at the current moment. And so I think that there's definitely some star players out there who obviously would love to go play on that stage, and you know, obviously, I don't think you could do it where, I know sometimes when they have international competitions in soccer, I believe they basically take some of the players off the team and go play for their national teams and keep playing games. You wouldn't do that with baseball, but you could take an extra week break around the All Star break. Maybe move the All Star game back to the middle of August for an Olympic year and take an extra week from it to allow these guys to go participate in that special event. So, but rant on that is over. I wish that was the case though, because I really do think that could open the eyes to new fans in other countries. That I think the more you grow the game worldwide, the better for baseball.
yeah, it is. It's definitely a good thing if they were able to do that. But I mean, I'm just happy that baseball's back in the Olympics to begin with.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, it was one of my favorite sports to watch at the time, and mostly because the United States would usually dominate it every year. But still, it's definitely good for the sport that it's back in, and if they can help grow the game by putting their stars, in the Olympics, then I mean, more power to him.
Oh yeah.
But we've probably spent way too much time on that than we really wanted to. But it's some good points. But let's jump over to all these trades that we've had happen so far. So we're gonna jump back to July 15th was the first one that we had. And that's when the Braves acquired outfielder Jock Peterson from the Chicago Cubs for first base prospect Bryce Ball.
Yeah, so I'll have a lot to say about this, but I'm not gonna say a ton because, but Jock Peterson is, he is what he is. He's a good hitter against right-handers for his career. He actually has hit good against lefties since he got to Atlanta. That probably won't last very long, but he's shown some ability. He's cut down his swing a little bit, made a lot better contact against lefties. He's gonna have a pretty good on base percentage. He's going to pop some home runs. The average isn't really going to be there. He's going to play a slightly below average outfield. So with the Ronald Acuna Jr. injury right before the All Star break, the Braves went ahead and grabbed him to go start in right field every day, um, so that they could at least try to find some production back. Because for the past month or so, the Braves have been starting Guillermo Heredia, Orlando Arcia, and Abraham Almonte in the outfield. So that has not gone very well. And Jock Peterson's at least a veteran player who has the potential to pop some home runs every now and then. But the Cubs got back a first base prospect in Bryce Ball, who has really big raw power, but has really struggled. And he's a 24-year-old or 23-year-old in low A that's really struggled this year. So I don't think many Braves people expected him to ever contribute at the big league level. Now there is enough talent there to where he's got a tool that's pretty coveted. That maybe if he improves a lot on some things, he could eventually make it. It's not like he's a nobody prospect, but he's definitely not a guy I would expect to really become a good big league player. So, but he is he's better than he's probably what you would get for Jock Peterson. So
Yeah, and like you said, he for a rental, a guy who has a really good tool that's really struggled and that you never really expected to, contribute at a major league level for your team. I mean, it's not a terrible trade. You're trying to hit a lottery ticket anyways on rental guys most of the time, especially not top level rental guys like maybe a Max Scherzer, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but for a guy like Jock Peterson, trading a guy who has a huge raw power but has really struggled. I mean, he goes in and he's the 20th ranked prospect in the Cubs system. I mean, I think he was 10th or 11th in the Braves at the time.
don't think he was that high.
Was he?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I thought we were
Maybe.
talking about it in the chat. He was somewhere up
He
there, but
he was rated higher last year because
maybe that's what it
in
was.
2019 he was good, but he was playing in rookie ball as a 21-year-old and he absolutely crushed the baseball. But he missed a year, and then this year he's been very very not good. And he's a 23-year-old in A ball, and you
Right.
kind of worry about. I mean, at a certain point, like he's probably at least 2 years from the big leagues if he figures it out, turns it around right now. But 30% plus strikeout rate in A ball as a 23-year-old and a sub 700 OPS. I mean, he's really
Yeah.
struggled this year. But
It's the prototypical
but
lottery
oh
ticket
yeah,
type guy. That's
yeah.
and that's
You never
exactly.
know with him though. Like you say, because he does have that raw power. But
Yeah.
anyways, another trade the Braves made this week. Just real quick, don't want to talk about it too much. They did get Stephen Vogt from the Diamondbacks. They've struggled at catcher since with Darno out. Who Darno is actually starting a rehab assignment on Friday, so that he might be back as soon as next week. But Stephen Vogt got moved to the Braves for another first base prospect that was in rookie ball that nobody really thinks of as really a big prospect, um, but Vogt's now a Brave and not a Diamondback, so a little more.
That's a
The
game
more you
changer.
know. Yeah.
Well, I would say our first real blockbuster trade that we had happen was Nelson Cruz got traded from the Minnesota Twins to the Tampa Bay Rays. It was Nelson Cruz and Calvin Foucher for Joe Ryan and Drew Strotman.
Yeah. So Nelson Cruz, obviously he's a veteran. He's old. Um, so he's got but he's good still. He's hitting 294, 370, 537 with 19 home runs. That was before the trade, which I think he's already hit a couple home runs for the Rays.
Yeah.
Um, and then so they got him for a couple guys that they got back. The Twins got back. Joe Ryan. I was looking at his page earlier. He's pretty old for his level. He's 25. He's in AAA. Um, but he has been really good. He has elite numbers of strikeouts and walks. He's got a good command and he strikes out a ton of guys, but he does have trouble with the home run ball. So, but he's definitely a high level performer from Tampa's system. And then, Stropman's another guy who has been pretty good in AAA, posting a 3.39 ERA this year. A couple of guys who are maybe swingmen at the big league level, but definitely interesting players, especially when you look at Tampa's pitching development and how well they've done with that in the past.
Yeah, and Nelson Cruz coming over to the Tampa Bay Rays, that's kind of the big bat that we all kind of felt that they really needed to solidify themselves. I mean, they're in talks about acquiring, some starting pitching to help now with Glass now out, but it's a big pickup for the Rays, even on a rental too. I mean, they were in talks with him in the offseason too, and he decided to go back to Minnesota rather than going to Tampa. But I mean, I mean, I can't speak how much of an impact I think that's going to make for Tampa's offense. I mean, it's a game changer for them that I think they've really lacked at times. Rosarena tried to carry them through the playoffs a lot last year, but they really relied on that pitching. And if you can get, really good production and a good clubhouse guy like Nelson Cruz into that clubhouse and maybe teach these younger guys something, that could be big for the Rays. And trading two guys, like you said, their pitching system is so deep and they're really good at it. Trading two guys who are possibly swingmen or back into the rotation type arms for that. It seems like a win-win deal for both sides.
Yeah, no doubt. I definitely like the trade on both ends. The Rays needed another bat, and the Twins got some pretty good guys in return for a 40-year-old who's a rental. So
Yeah, speaking of 40-year-olds being traded, the next one trade we had happen was Rich Hill got traded from the Tampa Bay Rays actually to the New York Mets for relief pitcher Tommy Hunter and low prospect Matt Dyer.
yeah, so first off, Tommy Hunter, he's a veteran pitcher, been around a long time. Been with the Phillies the last couple years. He was with the Mets this year, of course. He's been okay. With the Phillies, he was, you know, pretty meh around a 4 ERA. In fact, his career around a 4 ERA. He's had a few good years at the big league level. Um, he's just kind of a depth piece in the bullpen. I don't really expect him to develop into too much. Um, but he's maybe a guy the Rays look at his some of the stuff there as being better than he's performed this year. But
I think
and
he's
then you
also
look at
out for the year.
is he really?
Yeah, I think Tommy
Um,
Hunter's actually out for the rest of the
he
year.
might be. He hadn't pitched very many innings, so it's possible. But look at Matt Dyer as a guy who really, I mean, a low A prospect, that catcher. I mean, he's 23 in low A. Um, he's got some power, but he really hadn't done much. There's not very much on him as a scouting report goes. And I thought this is an interesting deal. It might be a little bit of a move to try to clear a little bit of money
Yeah,
because, the Rays are obviously very conscious of their payroll and, maybe clearing out money. I don't really understand trading Rich Hill for them, but obviously for the Mets picking up a starter with the guys that they have injured. I mean, the Mets injured list is probably the best rotation in the National League. So it's pretty
yeah.
insane. I mean, DeGrom, Carrasco, and Syndergaard all on the injured list right now. So pretty crazy there. But he okay, it says here Hunter is supposed to come back this season.
Is he? Okay.
Yes.
I saw something that they were potentially talking about. He might be out, but
Yeah, he might be.
um,
He hopes to return.
yeah.
Is what they're saying. But
Well, I mean, like, and you were talking about the pickup for the Mets and the Rich Hill thing, or Rich Hill trade. He's a solid guy. He can get in. He's not going to go deep into games. He's going to go 5 innings most of the time, maybe even less, and you're going to get him out of there. The good thing about Rich Hill is that he's an odd character, first of all, but he's a guy who throws his curveball just about as much as his fastball. So he's only a fastball curveball guy. So he throws his fastball 46% of the time and the curveball 43% of the time. But he throws like 4 different curveballs. But when, like you said, their rotation on the IL is probably the best one. So when all those guys come back, Rich Hill's easy enough to slide to the bullpen and be a 2-pitch pitcher out of the bullpen. So if you need a swing man, in one of those playoff games, we always see starters getting pulled early. He's a
Yeah.
guy who can come in and, if you pull a starter in the 3rd inning, he can eat you up 3 more innings and get you to the 6th where you can use your high leverage guys, for the rest of the time. And he'll eat you some solid innings right now while those guys are out. He won't pitch too terribly. I mean, a 3.95 ERA this year, and he still strikes out a decent amount. His walks can be at times, and it's just all about if you can keep him healthy. I mean, he deals with blisters and some arm issues because he throws that curveball so much. But if you're not pitching him too much and you're just kind of letting him, do those 4 or 5 innings, get out of there, and then you move him to the bullpen, maybe pitch him every 3 or 4 days for an inning or two. It could be a really solid deal for not giving up too much and not really taking on too much more of that contract.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the one thing about the Mets is that obviously Syndergaard's probably not coming back this year, and you look at Carrasco and you have no idea what he's going to give you after the injuries he's been through and the setbacks he's had in rehab. He might pitch a few. I think he's supposed to actually come back this week, but the pitching. He could pitch 2 weeks and then get hurt again, or he could be ineffective. You just don't know. And then DeGrom's been injured enough to where this year where you kind of worry about, especially with a forearm strain, you worry about it a little bit. But they still needed a guy because behind that, I don't know if you can rely on. I know Taiwan Walker's been really good this year so far, but I don't know if you want to rely on him fully. Um, but you've also got David Peterson's has pitched a lot of innings for them this year, and
Right.
he's not very good. So you can always improve off of that. But
And then
and
they
obviously their
lost.
bullpen as well. You can move them to the bullpen like you're talking about. So
Right, and then they lost. I mean, Joey Lucchesi still too. They lost him to Tommy John surgery earlier this year. He was expected to be, that 5th or 6th type starter for them. So
yeah,
that adds to their injury list pitching staff.
yep,
But
for sure.
we'll move on to the next one. I think this is probably the most surprising trade to me that had happened so far, and that was the San Diego Padres acquiring Adam Frazier from the Pittsburgh Pirates for shortstop Tucipia. I'm going to butcher that name. I'm sorry if
Tucupita.
you. Yeah, I'm going to butcher that.
I have no idea how to say that.
Marcano. I mean, this is the trade for names: Jack Sowinski and Mitchell Milano.
Yep. So the Pirates guys that they got or got back from this trade were pretty good. The It depends on who you ask really, because I think the Marcano is rated as high as like number 5. Was rated as high as number 5 in the Padres system, and he was also rated as low as like 30 by some services. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of he's supposedly the prize of this, and there's a lot of variation on how good he is. You look at his he's very fast. He's got good speed, and his plate discipline numbers are really good. Under 10% strikeout rates through 2019 in the minors, and then in 2021 in 44 games at AAA before getting a call up to the big leagues, he had a 13% strikeout rate. So this is a guy who doesn't hit for a lot of power. He did hit 6 home runs this year, so maybe showing a little bit more pop than he had only hit 3 in his entire career until this year. He's hit 6 this year. So you look at a guy who a little bit in the way of like a Jose Ramirez, maybe a guy who's kind of figuring out how to hit for that power later on, but definitely a guy who's got a good hit tool and good speed, plays some shortstop. So that's a good guy to get if you're the Pirates.
Yeah, he comes in now. Like you said, the variation on per Fangraphs, he's the Pirates' 34th ranked prospect now.
Yeah,
Um, and you got Milano is 45, and then Sawinski's 51. Those guys were just kind of the real prize here was Marcano. Adam Frazier, though, it's weird for the Padres to acquire him. I mean, he's a very good player, leads the National League in hits right now, maybe even leads the majors in hits. I'm not quite sure, but he's primarily been a second baseman. I mean, he can play all over. He can be a utility guy, but it was just kind of odd to see that they had traded for him when they have guys like Jake Cronenworth who are going to play everyday second baseman. I guess the plan is to use Frazier as an all around utility guy, but I feel like the Padres already had a lot of those guys. I mean, Frazier's better than Jurickson Profar or Jorge Mateo or even Hassan Kim at this point, but it was really weird for them to trade him, but he's a good player, more contact guy. I mean, he's batting 324. He has 4 homers this year, but a 388 on base percentage is really good. His career numbers at 346. So I mean, he's definitely having a career year, a 130 WRC plus, where his career is a 105. But he's a guy I feel like has been kind of figuring out how to hit and not worrying about the power too much. Going to a team like San Diego where they already have so many people that are power, and just being another one of those grinders that they can grind at bats and just be pesky like the Padres lineup really is. I mean, it's a really solid trade. It's going to be interesting to see how they figure out how to fit all of these players in the lineup, because I mean depth's gonna win you games, but I feel like they have 10 or 11 guys that could be starters on pretty much any other team.
Yeah, and you look at Adam Frazier as a guy who I think you hit it pretty well. The one thing that I think is, probably held his value down a little bit is his 359 batting average on balls in play this year, because his career average is around 314, but in the past 4 years, which it's only full seasons in the big leagues, his numbers are around 300 on his BABIP. So he's probably not a 324 hitter, although he's made improvements. He doesn't hit the ball particularly hard. He's a guy who the BABIP's going to fluctuate a lot just because there's a lot of balls in play. So he could have a little bit of a lucky year and hit 320, or he could have a little bit of an unlucky year like last year and hit 230. So you just don't know with him. But he can play a pretty good defense, and he's a solid player. I think he's a solid everyday player. I don't think he's quite like a perennial all-star type guy, or a guy who is really more than. I mean, he's an all-star this year, but I don't think he's a guy who's really going to be an all-star too many times in his career. But he's a solid player, and he's under control, I believe, through 2020. I think he's a free agent 2023, so he's under control another
Yeah.
year. So he can play a little bit of. He's played second base most of the time, but he can also play a little bit of outfield. Um, I definitely think this is a solid move for the um, Tampa Bay. I mean, for the San Diego Padres to go get a guy like this.
Yeah, like I said, it's going to be interesting, especially with that control, because, like I mentioned, you do have a Jake Cronenworth, you do have Hassan Kim that you just brought over, that you had high hopes for. Maybe Cronenworth moves to more of a first base role if you decide to move Eric Hosmer, which there's been rumors about potentially that being a thing. I mean, that contract's going to be hard to move off of, but I mean, maybe that is a thing, and you look at maybe giving Frazier more of the run at second, and then using, Cronenworth at first or something. But
Yeah,
that control, it is very. That's what made it more interesting. I could see if this was a rental type player, but that control for the Padres is going to make it really interesting to see what they are going to do. And don't count them out of maybe flipping somebody else that in a bigger trade. I mean, AJ Preller, who knows what that guy's doing?
yeah. So, and you also look at this as the Padres have made a pattern out of trading for guys with control.
Yeah,
You look at they've traded for Blake Snell with a couple years of control. Yu Darvish has a couple years of control. You look at a
Clevenger,
Clevenger. I mean,
Nola.
yeah, Austin Nola. Yeah, I mean they play trade for guys most of the time with some control. They don't want them there just for the part of the year. So I think that's definitely a pattern with them, and they're really the only team in the big leagues that's really pulled that off very often. So definitely interesting. But let's move on to our next one here. And I believe we were going to talk about Andrew Chafin,
Yeah.
which this trade I absolutely love for the Cubs.
Yeah, I do too. So what the trade is? The Oakland A's acquire left-hander reliever Andrew Chafin for outfielder Greg Deichmann. I'm assuming that's how you say it, or
I
Deichmann,
think Dykeman. I think
Deichmann or
Dykeman.
Deichmann,
Yeah,
whatever.
but I'm not sure.
and then right-handed pitcher Daniel Palencia. So I think we were looking last night. Dykeman is the eighth rated prospect, at least in Oakland system, and Palencia was the 12th rated at the time.
Yeah, so you look at Dykeman as a guy who I like this because he's a guy that has reports say 70 grade raw power. I mean, he's the guy that's got great raw power, but he hasn't shown it tons in games. What he has shown in games is the ability to draw walks and to make pretty good contact for a guy of his profile. What he can do is if he can figure out a way to lift the ball a little bit more, that raw power can start to show off in games. If he starts showing off raw power in games with his walk rate and his ability to, it appears to limit strikeouts to a certain level for a guy of his profile, he could end up being a pretty solid big league player. He is a first base only type, uh, but he's a guy who I think could definitely end up being a solid hitter. Of course, Oakland, he's pretty, he could be moved because of the ability to, they have Matt Olson there, so there's not really much they're going to do with him unless he DHs, which, there's usually ways you can find DHs for a lot, and not, waste a player like Diekman. So, Palencia is a guy. Apparently, I don't know too much about him, but he throws hard. Apparently, so maybe a reliever in the future. But
Yeah.
you look at Chafin. Chafin's a really solid left-handed reliever. He's been really good for the Cubs this year. He's been good in his career for the most part. He's kind of funky, but he's a guy who I'm really surprised that the Cubs got this return for Andrew Chafin. I really am.
Yeah, and so I'll talk a little bit more on Palencia because I looked him up a little bit last night as after this trade happened. Big fastball, throws 97 and 99. They said he's touched 100 a couple times. Curveball is still really good as well. His main struggle is command. He really struggles with command. I mean, his grade is right now a 30, and his future value is on command is a 45. So he's a future value 40. 40 overall on the 2080 scale. Not Rule 5 eligible for until December of 2024, so he's got three more seasons or so. 21-year-old A ball, so like you said, he's kind of getting up there to that point where he needs to start progressing up the ladder. But he was just drafted, um, I believe, last year because this is his first
Yeah,
pro season.
yeah. I think
Um, so
yeah.
it doesn't say exactly when he was drafted on here, but this is his first pro season that has any stats to it, and 879 Ks per nine or 8.79 Ks per nine, but 3.77 walks per nine and a 1.88 hit
Yeah.
homers per nine. So it runs an extremely high BABIP. I mean, it's only been 14 innings, so it's really a small sample size, and that was all as a starter. But definitely a future bullpen arm.
Yeah,
But okay,
yeah, his home runs. He gives up a lot of home
yeah,
runs. His command's obviously just not there yet, but this is a guy you're not really looking at his stats too much. I think you're
correct.
looking more at, the fact that he throws hard.
He throws hard and has
He's
a good
got some
curveball.
stuff. He's got there's something there, and he's not even the top headliner in the trade for a reliever. So
Right.
you look at a guy who's kind of an interesting for a throw in. But then, obviously Diekman being the big piece there, and
Especially for a rental reliever.
yeah,
And this news happened last night. And what also is big about this is Chafin was looked at as probably the second best left-handed reliever on the market behind Taylor Rogers. I mean, depending on how Brad Hand you feel about Brad Hand, but Rogers left with an injury last night from his game and went on the IL today with left uh, finger sprain. I don't know exactly which finger it was, but that severely lowers the probability of him being traded this offseason because he's got or traded this year because he's got control through next season. So you can possibly get him in the offseason. So Chafin could have been could be the best left-handed reliever traded at the deadline. And for this kind of a prospect, even as a rental, or this kind of prospect, capital as a rental player, I mean, this could be a very good move by the A's because had Chafin been the top left-handed reliever, today, he might have got a bigger deal or a bigger haul than what they ended up trading for him.
yeah, no doubt. I definitely think it's interesting that that he, timing works out like that at the, at this level. So you never know. You might have an injury. In fact, today there's talk about Trey Turner having left the game and they weren't sure why, and turns out he has COVID or something. I
Yeah.
think someone said so.
Yeah.
It's like it's a wild time of year, and timing is everything because you never know when a guy might go down, and then somebody else becomes really valuable all of a sudden. So
Yeah, if you have MLB teams, if you have anybody potentially being traded, do not play them. Just let them sit out or
yeah,
something. I mean, the Nationals are doing that. They're not going to start Strasburg now, or not Strasburg.
sure, sure.
Speaking of Strasburg, he's out
You
for
are
the
not.
year now.
Yeah,
You're
and you're
not
gonna
going to.
have a hard time getting trading Strasburg if you want to with
Yeah,
his
you're not.
injury history and
Uh,
contract.
I meant to say Scherzer. They're not going to pitch
Yeah.
Scherzer on Thursday now. Yeah, that was the plan, and they've pretty much already said that they don't want to do that. So that, I mean, that's just a potential thing. Like the Cubs, you should sit Chris Bryant at this point because he's going to be gone. Don't pitch Craig Kimbrell again. Like, just get the trades done with. Um, but that will lead into the next one. We had one more trade happen, and that actually happened just a couple hours ago. And that was the Astros acquired relief pitcher Kendall Graveman and relief pitcher Rafael Montero from the Seattle Mariners for third baseman Abraham Toro and relief pitcher Joe Smith.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting trade because this is a team that people are kind of thinking the Mariners might buy. They got a good record, and they're a team that it's a tough situation for them because they've got a good record, but they're in a good division. You look at their record at 55-46 is really solid, but they're 6 games behind Houston. They're a game behind Oakland. They're just a game out of the wild card, I believe. Yeah, 1 game out of the wild card. So, they've got a chance. But when you look at their talent level on the team, you just don't know about it. And this would typically appear to be a trade that a team that wasn't contending was going to make. But I think it's interesting because Kendall Graveman is a guy who, if you look at his stats, he's got a .82 ERA on the season. He's been really good for the Mariners, but his peripherals are not near that good. They've still been good, but his FIP being over, almost 3, his xFIP being over 3 doesn't coincide with the .82 ERA. So he's been good, but not quite that good. Rafael Montero is a guy who was DFA'd. So you're giving up Kendall Graveman, and what you're getting back is the number 3 prospect for the Astros, but a guy who's been in the big leagues this year. So Abraham Toro has been in the big leagues. He's got good plate discipline numbers with a really low BABIP in the big leagues. So you think that he might have been bit by a little bit of bad luck this year, and the fact that he's obviously a high rated prospect, he's under control for a long time, and he was expendable for the Astros because of he's a third baseman and he's playing behind Bregman and Correa's on that side of the infield, even though Correa might be gone after the season. Um, it's a situation where I think you're looking at a team that I think you're looking at well, it's probably a win-win trade. So but Kendall Graveman, he's gonna help the Astros, no doubt. They need a couple relievers, and then I think Abraham Toro is gonna be a pretty good player for the Mariners, and I definitely am, I'm questioning the Astros moving him for that kind of return because I believe Kendall Graveman's also a rental, so you're giving up 5 years of your number 3 prospect in your system who's big league ready for a right-handed reliever that's good, but not like he doesn't have shutdown stuff. He's good, but he doesn't have shutdown stuff. So I definitely like this trade for the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah, and it's a great trade for the Mariners in my eyes. I know there's a lot of speculation or talk that the Mariners clubhouse wasn't a big fan of this trade, but I feel like there's another wrinkle here. Is the Seattle Mariners GM Jerry Dipoto has been or is notorious for being one of the most active general managers in trades, not even just in season but in the off season. It's a game every year of how many trades can we tally that Dipoto makes. I believe one year was like 18 trades in the offseason or something ridiculously stupid. But there could be another wrinkle to this that Toro could be flipped to another team for something else because Dipoto said, like, in hindsight, this move doesn't look good at face value. But once you see that the other deals that we're working on that we hope to finalize soon, it will make a lot more sense. for a general manager being that wide open and honest with a media outlet or social media in general, that really it really throws a wrench into this whole thing is what I think. And there's been people coming out, prospect rankers and people that know these prospects a lot more than we do, saying that like nerd teams like the Rays, the Dodgers at times that are that way, the Pirates at some point, they're guys that like Toro a lot. These nerd teams really like Toro. So you could see him flipped for a really good reliever. Maybe even a Craig Kimbrell. I mean, that would be an insane move for the Mariners because he's under contract for another year and you're really hoping to compete next year. But I do think that it maybe has another wrinkle that they could potentially be in play for something a lot bigger by trading Toro.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that I would think might be considered here because um, you look at you look at those just what Dipoto said. I mean, otherwise, I would think that this would be a good move for the Mariners regardless. They need offense really bad, um, and Toro's a young, controllable offensive player that they can add to their group of young, controllable offensive players like J.P. Crawford or Jared Kelenic, who hadn't had the best big league debut, but he's still a highly thought of prospect. You've got some guys like that out there already. Kyle Lewis, who was Rookie of the Year last year. You could add a guy like Abraham Toro, who's another young, controllable, solid position player. That would be pretty smart. But even if you flip him, you could probably definitely make well in this flipping him too. He's a valuable guy right now. So I definitely like that the move for them in a vacuum. It's a good move. I don't know if it completely makes sense with the way that they're trying to contend this year, but um, I mean, if
Who
you look at
knows?
yeah, like I say, you never know because Toro had good plate discipline numbers and had a really low BABIP with the Astros. So you would expect his numbers, the way he's hit the ball, to be better than they are. So I definitely, think that this might work out for the Mariners, even if they aren't able to flip Toro like they're talking about. So,
Well,
um,
yeah, and my point is, it might even help them. It might be a move to even help them this year. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
I know the Mariners clubhouse didn't seem so happy, but if you go to every one of those people in the clubhouse, now this is complete speculation, by the way, but if you go to every member of that clubhouse and you ask them which reliever or which closing pitcher would you rather have, Kendall Graveman or Craig Kimbrell, like
yeah,
every single one of those people are going to take Craig Kimbrell. So if you
yeah.
say you flip Toro for that guy, I mean, like I said, complete speculation. There's no definitive here, but don't you think that Mariners clubhouse kind of bumps up a little bit? Like, oh hey, wait, we got Craig Kimbrell now, and we're going to have him for next year too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of times you look at trades around the trade deadline, and I think you look at I think the Mariners it's reactionary. You
Yeah,
look at it's kind of like when a coach gets fired, and the players' immediate reaction because they like the coach, they're friends with him, they've been around him for so long. Typically, if they're just not getting the job done, a lot of times the players' immediate reaction is, "Oh my God, this is horrible. What am I going to do now? This stinks." He was, their friends, their families are friends, all that. But you look at, then they hire a new coach, they meet him, and they get to know him, and I think that might be a case you look at here. But we'll see. Hopefully the hopefully the trade works out. And honestly, I hope Abraham Toro stays with the Mariners because, for one thing, I think it helps the Mariners if he does in the future. I don't think they're good enough to really contend this year. They might make the playoffs in a wild card scenario or something, but I don't think they're good enough to win when they get there. Um, and then you look at Abraham Toro and a guy who I don't want to see players get traded and flipped immediately and that kind of thing. I think it's bad for the player. Um, I would much rather see the player, get a new start somewhere and stay there for a while. So, but we'll see what happens. It'll definitely be interesting to track because, as we know, the trade deadline, Jerry Dipoto is always that active, to say the
yeah,
least.
always is. Well, let's look at some of the bigger names that we expect to be traded and maybe some potential landing spots for them.
Yeah.
So Off the top of our head, we've talked a lot about Trevor Story already being traded throughout the offseason and stuff. But where's a couple spots that you could see Trevor Story really being an impactful player down the stretch?
Well, the thing about Trevor's story is that a lot of contending teams already have really good shortstops. You look at the Dodgers; they got good shortstop. They got a bunch of guys who can play shortstop who are good. Seager, and they got Chris Taylor. I mean, he can play shortstop. You look at the Padres. They've got a good shortstop in Tatis. You look at the Giants. Brandon Crawford's been so good this year. I think the Mets could make some sense for him because of Lindor's injury. Um, but it's kind of hard to say for sure. We don't know what the timeline is on Lindor. Maybe the Brewers make sense. They need offense in the worst way. And then you go across the American League, and there's several teams that maybe could make a move for him. But you look like the Astros; they've already got a guy. The Rays have Wander Franco, Taylor Wall. They got a bunch of guys. The Red Sox have Bogarts. So I mean, you're looking at it both sides. The White Sox have Tim Anderson. Most of these teams have their shortstop situations pretty well set right now. Um, so I think that maybe the Mets with the injury, um, but you know there's been talk that Trevor Story could maybe take some practice in the outfield or take some practice at second or third base. So you could end up seeing him get moved for something like that. Although I don't really like that because I think Trevor Story is really good at shortstop. So
Yeah, I don't think so either. And like you said, I mean, we've heard the White Sox, but they have Tim Anderson.
yeah,
The Yankees supposedly were looking at him for a center field.
yeah,
He is a tough one, and there's even been a little bit of more rumors about him potentially staying put and them giving him the qualifying offer, which I'm not a huge fan of.
yeah.
But I mean, there's the more the closer we get to this deadline, the quieter the Trevor Story trade talks have kind of got, and the louder the hey qualifying offer talk has kind of picked up.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's interesting because you look at, these players get moved at the deadline and about to be free agents, and it's interesting is the prospect that you can get from trading him is hit probably better than the prospect you can pick in the comp round because you're probably getting a top 10 organizational prospect in the comp round of the draft that you would get for the qualifying offer. So are you going to be able to get a guy who's rated like that? And not just that, but you can also take that money that you get from that extra money you get from the comp round and add it to your first round signing. So you can sign a guy over slot in the first round that could possibly be like a top 50, top 60 prospect. So that would be very interesting strategy for the Rockies, and I think they would probably prefer to trade him now. But I could maybe see where they bring him into the off season. So and get try to get that draft pick, but it'll be interesting to find out. You know, he's kind of one of those players that he's had a little bit of a down year this year to his standard. So, but we'll see what happens. I do expect him to get moved somewhere, but like I say, it's kind of hard to say where because
Yeah.
most of these teams have shortstops already that are contenders. That's really the main thing that's going to hurt the Rockies with this trade. So.
All right. Well, let's jump to the next one. Max Scherzer.
Yeah, so Max Scherzer is a guy who has 10-5 rights, so he can pick basically where he wants to go. He can veto trades, and that's going to hurt his market if you're the Nationals. I do think the Nationals should move him. Now, whether they do or not, I don't know, but they
Sounds
should move
very
him.
likely at this point.
Yeah, so it's been said that he wants to go to the West Coast somewhere. So you immediately think about the Dodgers with Trevor Bauer out; they could use another starter. You look at the Giants; they could use another starter. The Padres could use. I mean, all the contending teams could use a starter like Max Scherzer. The Mariners actually would make some sense here. Maybe they could get a package of him and a controllable player. Apparently, the Nationals are potentially in line for a fire sale. So, it looks like that they may be able to pick up a guy with him. But we'll see what happens here. I doubt he gets dealt within the division. Um, and obviously he can veto trade, so it really depends on where he wants to go. And then they can try to work out a trade with somebody. It's if the asking price isn't there, they can just say, well, we're just not going to trade him then. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
There was, yeah, it will be interesting. There was a little bit of a talk that Scherzer might potentially want to work out an extension with the team that he's going to as well,
Yeah,
which has led to rumors that the Nationals kind of wanted to trade him before Friday. Like they wanted to trade him on, you know, Wednesday or Thursday. That gives a little bit of extra time that they can try and work out an extension if that is something that he wants to do. But like you said, it sounds like he wants to go to more of the West Coast. I don't think he's going to go to the Mets. The Astros have been in the talks as well, but I don't think he's going to go there. I think it's going to come down to the Padres, the Dodgers, the Giants, and potentially the Mariners if that is something that they want to try and go big and do a hey let's go for it. But I think it's going to come down to probably one of those three NL West teams, and who's going to step it up, the most. And I think really it's going to come down to the Giants, or not the Giants, the Padres and the Dodgers. I don't think the Giants really have the great prospect capital that they're going to
yeah. Of
try and
course,
make that move.
I don't know if you're gonna need a super big prospect for
That is
this,
true.
because he's a rental as it is. So you might add him you might sign him to an extension, but he's still a rental because you could just sign him at the end of the season. So
Right.
um, obviously, and with his ability to pick where he wants to go, you basically basically what you have to do is you have to beat whatever the Nationals think they can get for the qualifying offer.
Correct.
So that's basically what you're going to have to do, because it's not like he's going to have a bidding war since he gets to pick. So that'll be interesting to see what happens with Max Scherzer. But a couple more guys that I think are likely to get traded are a couple Cubs guys, maybe a bunch of Cubs guys, really. But there could be as many as 4 or 5 star players get traded from the Cubs. But you look at Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Craig Kimbrell, and Javier Baez, all of them impending free agents, assuming that, or depending on what Kimbrell does with his option.
It's a team option.
It's a team option, so yeah. But depending on whether you want to pick up I think $15 million team option for a reliever, um, so which I think right now would probably be picked up.
Yeah, the way he's pitching, he's back to
Yeah,
vintage Craig Kimbrell. I imagine any team that's trading for him is
yeah,
going to pick that up. Um, I mean, the point is, Kimbrel can go to pretty much anybody. The Red Sox could use a end of the bullpen type guy. The uh, the Padres could. I mean, you could throw him right back in there. Those are two of his old teams. Kind of funny, but the Giants could even. They really could use that dominant closer at the end. I mean, you could. There's been a lot of talk about the Dodgers because of Jansen and Trinan just making like a super bullpen. Um, I mean, I don't. Kimbrel's a hard one to choose because literally every contender could use a guy like him.
yeah,
And even some of the fringe contenders could use him because you do have that team option. So if you want to pick him up, so a team like the Mariners, if you want to try and make a run this year, but really set yourself up for next year, I mean, Kimbrel can make sense for you. So he's kind of a hard one to narrow down to one specific place. A guy like Bryant, he's also very flexible because he can play so many different positions. He can play center field, he can play left field, he can still play third base. I mean, the Yankees make some sense for him because he can play center field for them. The Giants make sense because he can play a third base and outfield type role. Um, I don't know. I mean, who else is looking for an outfield type?
everybody. I
I
mean,
mean,
the thing is that I think you narrow down for these guys, except with the exception of Kimbrel, teams that are 100% for sure in it this
right.
year. Like, I mean, I think because you look at a team like the Mariners, or a team maybe like the Braves, or you know somebody that's the Indians, maybe some of these teams that are around 500 within that 5 games back range. You look at these teams as teams that you need to um, you will need to you would probably not go all in, trade anything of noteworthy for a rental this year because of just kind of being on the outside looking in right now. If you get hot, you can go into the postseason. You maybe pick up a guy with some control because you can maybe he might be able to help you get there this year, but next year would really be when you really use him. So I think I think a Craig Kimbrell would make sense for a team like the Braves or the Mariners or somebody. Um, but you look at the Yankees even really because of their situation. But you look at him as a guy that but the other guys, I mean, maybe the Mets with all their injuries
Yeah.
could snatch up Bryant for something. I think the Rays might even make sense for another bat. I mean, they got so many prospects. They could maybe make sense for another bat. So, um, you know, I think it's interesting to look at what might happen with these guys. But I do expect a couple of them to get traded. I expect a couple of them to be kept by the Cubs and maybe try to sign to extensions. That I think a lot of people are expecting them all to get traded, but I think a couple of them get the Cubs keep around and try to bring them back after this year. So.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting about which ones they do trade because, like you said, they have a lot of trade pieces
Yeah.
that are going to be free agents this year. One more guy that I wanted to kind of hit on because I think this could be a really interesting one if we do see him traded, and I think there's a couple places that he could really fit, but that's Joey Gallo. Texas could obviously keep him, but the way he's playing, I think if you are going to ever trade him right now might be the time. And I think a team like the Rays maybe makes sense. A team like the Yankees because they have that obvious need in the outfield, and maybe a couple of the NL teams because he's still, like he's a really good defensive right fielder. So it's not like you're going to have to DH him, and he's really started figuring out how to hit more consistently.
Yeah, Joey Gallo's had a good year. The thing that stands out with him is the strikeout rate. That scares anybody. But because he could go on a stretch where he's not making enough contact to get to hit the ball for, even he's a guy that could very well for the rest of the season be a 180 hitter regardless of how many home runs he's hitting. So, but he's a guy who is, he's definitely made some improvements and he's having a good year. He's got light tower power, of course. Plays pretty good defense in the outfield. Got a great arm, so he's definitely valuable. He's got another year of control. Um, there's several teams I think make sense for him. And I think it's kind of those fringe contenders like we talked about before that the Braves will need an outfielder to start next year. I think the Braves make sense for him because they're going to need they got Acuna coming back, but other than that, you don't know about your other two spots. Jock Peterson's on a mutual option. You don't know if he'll be back. Ozuna with his issues, you don't know if he'll be back. So you could see Gallo end up there. You could maybe see like we talked about with the Mariners, they just need offense in general. The Yankees are another team that are a little bit behind right now, but they could bring in Gallo and they're going to have a spot in the outfield next year. So you could definitely see him come in there because he'll have a couple years of control. Of course, you could also see any of the contenders jump on him. So definitely an interesting guy. Very polarizing player. Um, but we'll see what happens with him. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if he'll get traded
Yeah,
because there's just so many, high rated players, big names out there this year that, there's some years or maybe even last year where, Joey Gallo might have been the biggest star player moved at the deadline. So he might have gotten a better return, but this year there's a lot of pieces that people are looking to move at the deadline, and you just don't know. I don't know if he'll get moved, but it'll be interesting to find out.
yeah. I mean, there's a ton of people we didn't even talk about that or
Oh
mention that
yeah,
could be still impactful players. And that one thing I did want to say on Gallo is that we talked about it a little bit earlier. A certain team that likes to trade with control. The Padres could be somebody to watch out for on Gallo.
yeah,
They've been sneaking around supposedly in all the rumors. He has the control. Don't know where that would fit in the outfield or what they would even trade, but it would be something that I mean the Rangers. I know it's going to sound crazy, but doesn't the Rangers kind of make sense for what we were hearing a little bit earlier about? Hey, a team is willing, or the Padres are willing to eat or to trade Hosmer, eat some money, and trade a top four prospect for something. If you could do that for a Gallo, the Rangers get back a top four
yeah. You
prospect.
would need. I feel like you would need a lot more than just that one top five prospect if
Maybe I
you're
mean maybe you
because if you're
expand the
taking
deal.
on If you're taking, yeah, you would
Well,
need a
well, that's what I'm
huge
saying. I'm not
prospect
saying that's
capital if you're getting Hosmer back.
well, that's not a one for one
Yeah,
deal. I'm just saying
right,
that could
right,
be the
right. But
framework to it. Like they're already talking about, like, hey, Hosmer and a number of top ranked, Padres have a strong system, especially in those top four. If you can get one of those in a Gallo trade and then build a couple of the other pieces up and around it, and you're a team like the Rangers who you have a ton of money that you can eat some of that Hosmer contract right now, and you're not going to look to compete. Maybe you can flip him for something else at a lower salary, even. I mean, that kind of seems like a win-win deal if I'm the Rangers.
yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, you do think that I do think that that could happen. It's just that they would need to eat. They would need to eat the entire or the either the Padres would need to eat a pretty good portion of the contract, maybe not all of it, but a pretty good portion. Or they would have to throw in another top prospect. And I don't know if they're going to want to throw two top prospects in for Gallo and in Hosmer's contract, but you never know. We've seen trades like this in the past where a team basically purchases um, a prospect by taking on a contract that a team doesn't want. But the Hosmer deal's got a few more years, and it's an albatross of a contract. So um, I think a team's going to really need a lot of motivation to take that contract on. But we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. Um, I think that you look at this as a Gallo as a guy who I think it would be wise for them to trade. But you never know with Texas. I mean, they held on to Lance Lynn last year at the deadline for no reason. So
Mm-hmm.
you never know with them. But one other guy that we probably should talk about. I know we're running a little late on time, but this guy is probably out of all the guys we've talked about, maybe the least likely to get traded. But there have been rumors about it. There's two guys really but one of them I really don't expect. The guy I was thinking of is Jose Ramirez. There's been talk that Cleveland might be able to move him, or might be willing to move him. And this is a guy who, multiple or he's been in the MVP conversation for 5, 6 years in a row now. I mean, this would be a superstar move, and he's on a really good contract. You would need, this would take a very hefty return, but the Indians are in a situation, or about to be the Guardians, are in a situation where
Yeah,
um,
we didn't even talk
you
about that.
yeah, we didn't, but they're in a situation where they're about to go to full-fledged rebuild mode. They've traded a lot of their big pieces recently, and they're not good enough to. They're good, but they're not good enough to. I don't think they're good enough to contend this year, and they're just going to keep hemorrhaging pieces as long as their payroll is what it is. So I think it would be wise for them to kick off their rebuild by getting two or three maybe top prospects for a superstar like Jose Ramirez. But and then also that. Well, he's mentioned, and we also should mention Trey Turner with the potential of him getting traded. There'd been rumors out there. I don't really expect him to get traded, but you never know. It'll be interesting to see. So,
I think, I mean, if Trey Turner were to be traded, I think every team would be lining up.
oh, no doubt.
Because I think he's one of the true superstar players in the game. And I think he's underrated because of being on the Nationals, and he was always not the best guy. He was under Juan Soto or under Bryce Harper or under Anthony Rendon. He is a phenomenal player. And I mean, I think if there was rumors about him being traded at this deadline, maybe that didn't make sense, but there's also rumors that the Nationals aren't going to be able to sign him to extension, and those talks have kind of failed anyways with what they've started.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously now with him getting COVID, I think it makes the trade even more unlikely, but he's definitely a name that in the offseason you could see a team that doesn't want to jump in the shortstop market this year. Um, get Trey Turner on the 1 year deal, try to convince him to stay, and then sign him to an extension at that point. It's definitely going to be something very interesting, but I do think that he will not be in Washington for the long haul.
Yeah. And you've got this is a case too where with both of those guys that, your market's going to be shrunk because those are guys who are under control and they're potential cornerstones on a really good team, on a championship level team. And, the market's going to be a lot bigger in the offseason because you got a lot of teams that aren't really in a rush to make any improvements at the deadline because they're positioned. And, they're going to be wanting to make that move in the offseason, maybe to kick off their building of their roster for contending maybe in the future. Um, and right now I think it's mainly going to be teams looking to buy are mainly going to be the ones interested, and the market is just smaller, less of a bidding war. So interesting stuff. I definitely think that this is going to be a wild trade deadline this year compared to the last couple. I definitely think you're going to see multiple all-star level players get moved, maybe even multiple MVPs getting moved from previous seasons. So I think it's going to be interesting, and I think this trade deadline could change the landscape of what the rest of the season looks like. Because for the most part, most of the divisions are pretty wide open right now, and one player of the caliber of some of these players that are potentially getting moved could really make the difference in some of these divisions. You think specifically the NL East, that's been real close and nobody's really jumped out. You think maybe the NL Central, if the Reds or the Brewers add somebody, they could turn from good teams into teams that could really compete in the playoffs. You look at the West, they could add whichever one of those teams are so close could add the big piece maybe. In the AL, you look at the AL East. If the Rays can pull off some of these pieces, they become the favorites there over the Red Sox and the Yankees. Um, I definitely think this is going to be an interesting trade deadline, and it's going to be an important trade deadline too for the rest of this season. So I'm very excited to see what happens. And I believe the trade deadline is actually on Friday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that's when
Is
it's
it at
usually on the
4?
30. It is, and it's usually on the 31st.
I thought
But
it
this
was.
year, with it being a Friday, they're wanting to put it on the 30th for some reason. I don't know why, but
I thought it was at 3.
uh, I think it might be 4 Eastern, 3 Central. I don't know. It's somewhere around there. Um, uh, anyways, but I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure.
It,
It's in the early afternoon. We'll just
yeah,
say that.
it's gonna be, and like you said, it's gonna be one of the most insane deadlines. I mean, there is still all-star caliber players that we didn't talk about that could possibly be
Yep.
moved. So we'll definitely be having a extended episode next week, talking about all the trades that happened, and then I doubt we'll have time next week, but maybe in the episode after that, we'll fill you guys in on the Cleveland Guardians. That is,
Yeah.
and the name change that the Cleveland Indians have now announced, starting in 2022.
Yeah.
So
It's an unfortunate name, but
yeah, we'll
they
once we
couldn't
get to
they
that
couldn't
point.
be guardians of a 3-1 lead. So
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to make that joke, but we'll definitely hit more on that and go over our obvious disdain and dislike for that name change. So,
yeah.
but thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I know it's a kind of a long one and we rambled at times, and we're gonna probably do that on the next one because it's gonna be an insane trade deadline. Like you said, Friday. At some point in the early afternoon. We'll try and keep up as much as we can on our social media, on our Twitter, especially with all the trades, but it's going to be insanity on that day. So, you got anything else that you want to wrap up on?
Don't believe so. Just ready for it to get here. And as a Braves fan, and the position that they're in of maybe a buyer, maybe a seller, it's a very stressful time. So, and I know there's some people out there that are fans of maybe the Yankees or the Mariners or teams that are kind of in that situation. So, um, it's going to be really tough to. There's some tough decisions to be made, and I'm excited. That's what baseball is all about. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of the Batflip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.